The 9 villainous guests from the Golden Age were exposed by Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years, bringing famous American actors and musicians into people's living rooms. The audience felt like they were seeing two old friends reminisce over coffee thanks to his friendly demeanor and infectious laughter. However, that grin frequently vanished as soon as the cameras stopped shooting and the crowd dispersed. Members of his closest staff attest that Carson maintained an internal roster of guests he deemed to be genuinely horrible human beings. Johnny maintained an aura of professionalism during his time working as a producer with him, according to a former colleague. On the other hand, he would occasionally glance over at Ed during commercial breaks and mutter something about how the performer on stage should never be anywhere near a camera or a little child. Carson spoke out about his secret animosity against famous people in his final years. His intimate tales revealed a shadowy side of celebrities who were universally admired despite being far from what the public perceived them to be. Surprisingly, security had to intervene when a famous actress, who seemed kind and mild-mannered on his couch, screamed so violently at a young production assistant backstage. Another legend has it that Carson, a much-loved male star, was nearly reported to the authorities after being discovered in a strange act in his dressing area. In Carson's view, these stars were more than just demanding or problematic. He painted a picture of them as evildoers who had been shielded from reality by the entertainment industry for years, all the while the public saw only their meticulously staged public personas. Johnny Carson's intense animosity toward the first name on his secret list and the hitherto untold tale of their intimate backstage altercation must be revealed first. Johnny Carson's charming bully Frank Sinatra was unstoppable. Their chemistry looked natural on TV. The renowned crooner would crack jokes, tell stories, and even break into song whenever Sinatra made an appearance on The Tonight Show, with Carson smiling, laughing, and playing the role of the gracious host. At home, viewers could see them chatting casually, as if they were long-time friends. However, things were somewhat less amicable off-camera. Those who knew Carson well attest that he had a profound distaste for Sinatra, not because of his tremendous talent, which Carson had complete regard for, but because of the way the man with the piercing blue eyes dealt with others when he wasn't in the limelight. Several biographies have verified what Carson had previously told to a friend, that he would have been a mob enforcer if he weren't a singer. In my opinion, he was both at times. Sinatra's appearances on the show were notoriously tense for the staff. According to those who worked with him, he would invariably arrive with a group of 6 or 8 men. According to one stagehand, they weren't actors. Men, more like to those you would want to keep away from in a seedy alley. One cameraman likened the unsettling atmosphere to being under constant surveillance, as these individuals would spread out across the studio, keeping an eye on the employees. But Carson was most troubled by Sinatra's behavior toward those he viewed as beneath him. An early 1970s floor manager made the rookie error of not giving Sinatra the customary 3 minutes to prepare for his section. Witnesses say Sinatra snatched the man's tie, pulled him close and snarled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a visibly shaken Korean War veteran in his 50s, watched the whole incident unfold on a studio monitor from his office. It was said that Carson turned pale and nearly scrapped Sinatra's part at the last minute. That was the turning point when Johnny Carson's polite smile in front of the camera no longer betrayed his affection for Frank Sinatra. An underlying, unspoken contempt was concealed by an air of utmost professionalism. Carson was only persuaded to proceed with the show when producers brought up the ratings increase that Sinatra would bring. However, that wasn't the last straw for the two men. The unpredictability of Sinatra was another persistent cause of annoyance. He frequently postponed or even canceled last-minute appearances, occasionally, long after the studio has been reached. According to rumors, there was this one time he walked out of the studio 2 hours before taping because he wasn't in the mood. A commercial break was the most illuminating point in their troubled relationship. Someone in the vicinity could hear Sinatra make a sexist comment regarding the looks of a female employee. Carson abruptly shifted his demeanor from calm professionalism to irony, turning to him and saying, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The studio became silent. Sinatra sat quietly, taken aback that Johnny Carson dared to challenge him. Both men sported their trademark TV grins when the cameras rolled back, yet an icy air pervaded the set, shorter and more dispassionate inquiries followed from Carson. "I don't care how good his ratings are. Limit him to once a year maximum." This was a strong remark for Carson, who rarely interfered in booking decisions after taping finished. He seldom forbade visitors. Johnny, too, could not overlook Sinatra's nastiness and haughtiness after they had crossed a certain threshold. The next name on Carson's mental blacklist exemplified a different type of difficulty: the colossal ego that refused to acknowledge limits. In contrast to Frank Sinatra, who personified the abusive aspect of famous power, the icy Joan Crawford, Queen of Hollywood. Viewers finally got a glimpse of the refined icon they had loved for so long when Crawford made an appearance on The Tonight Show in 1970. She embodied classic Hollywood glitz with her prim appearance, impeccable manner, and well-rehearsed charisma. But according to several members of The Tonight Show staff, the woman behind the camera was nothing like the one on screen. Years later, Carson reportedly told his biographer, "She was one of the coldest people I've ever interviewed. Talking to her was like talking to a beautiful statue. Nothing inside." The trouble began even before Crawford arrived at the studio. Her team had sent over a 4-page list of lighting and staging demands so specific that the show's technical director kept a copy of it for decades. "Everything had to be exact," recalled a former producer. "The angle of her chair, the height of Johnny's desk, even the temperature of the studio, exactly 67 degrees, not 66, not 68. When Crawford finally arrived 3 hours before taping, she brought her own makeup crew. Despite the show already employing award-winning artists, what truly revealed her character was the way she treated people based on their importance. She practically curtsied to Johnny, a stagehand remembered. But when a young production assistant accidentally walked into her dressing room with a glass of water she'd requested, Crawford exploded in fury. That moment, witnesses said, showed exactly why Joan Crawford's name topped Johnny Carson's list. A woman who looked flawless on the outside, but carried an icy darkness just beneath the surface. According to several witnesses, Joan Crawford erupted into a tirade so vicious that everyone in the hallway froze in disbelief. She allegedly lashed out at the young assistant, a 20-year-old woman just starting her career, calling her a brainless little fool, and sneering that she should try working in a brothel, where incompetence might actually be useful. The young woman burst into tears and ran out of the room, while Crawford furiously demanded that she be fired. Carson's producer refused, creating an undercurrent of tension that lingered through the entire taping. But the most chilling part of Crawford's appearance wasn't just how she treated the staff. It was the cold precision with which she switched personas the moment the cameras came on. She was like a machine pretending to be a woman, one producer recalled. Every response, every laugh, every supposedly spontaneous moment had been rehearsed to perfection. Nothing felt real. During commercial breaks, Crawford would instantly drop her smile, sit in complete silence with a blank expression, refusing to speak to anyone, only to come alive again the instant the red light flashed. Johnny Carson, known for making even the most nervous guests feel at ease, could find no real connection with her. After the show, he reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and said, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, exposed Joan's alleged abuse of her adopted children, Carson wasn't surprised. Close friends said he simply nodded and remarked, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. Each word is true in my eyes." Even more sinister than Joan Crawford's cold control was the next name on Carson's list. An intimidating and menacing weapon made of raw strength. Orson Welles, the brilliant man who believed he was beyond the law. Welles made multiple appearances on The Tonight Show during Carson's tenure, mesmerizing viewers with his commanding presence, engaging anecdotes from his illustrious career, and powerful voice. Spectators witnessed an exceptional raccooner. Something else caught Carson and his team's attention. A man who appeared to think the standard norms of television did not apply to him anymore, since he was so engrossed in his own legend. After a particularly challenging tape, Carson allegedly declared, "Never again." He believes he is still in charge of Rome. Many of the issues arose before Welles ever entered the recording studio. Several writers for The Tonight Show have said that he was notorious for turning down the team's prepared questions and topics. He said that our inquiries were simple and plainly evident. As one of Carson's previous writers observed, he literally crossed them all out and handed back a blank page. This put Carson in the uncomfortable situation of having to interview one of cinema's greatest people without any framework or guidance. It was extremely challenging to edit Wells's lengthy, winding monologues because of his penchant for rambling on and on. Wells was supposed to appear for a 7-minute section during one occasion in the middle of the 1970s. The events that followed would demonstrate that not even Johnny Carson could be patient forever. On one especially tumultuous tape, Orson Welles remained on Carson's couch for about 25 minutes, well beyond his 7-minute limit. He paid zero attention to Johnny's hints that it was almost time to end. A director elaborated subsequently that Johnny had a whole system. There were telltale indicators that the part was over tapping his pencil, shifting in his seat, and looking at the producer. Despite seeing everyone, Welles continued speaking. That night, 2 of our scheduled visitors were unable to make it. Wells's conduct away from the camera was just as bad. Employees remembered that he avoided eye contact with the production assistants. As an alternative, you talk about them without mentioning their existence. He would still say things like, "Tell the girl, I need more water," or "Ask the boy to fix the light," even though both of those persons were standing right next to him. Those closest to Carson say that Wells's habit of treating The Tonight Show as though it were his own production was the thing that irritated him the most. He would improvise props, shift gears abruptly, and attempt to override the cameraman's cues from his seat. There was this one time when he got up and started directing our camera crew. An ex-producer recalled that Johnny was enraged. After that appearance, Carson leaned over Ed McMahon and whispered, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." Wells's disrespect for time and structure was particularly frustrating for Carson, who took pride in precision and respect for television craft. He kept praising Welles in public as one of the greatest cinematic visionaries. But behind closed doors, he started to regard him as a cautionary story, evidence that a bloated ego might derail even the most brilliant mind. If controlling Orson Welles' ego was a struggle, Carson's next guest was tough for a different reason. The unknown. The queen of verbal battle in Hollywood, Bette Davis. Bette Davis was the calm, humorous, and charismatic icon that audiences loved when she appeared on The Tonight Show. She was also full of anecdotes from her many film roles. What the audience was never shown, though, were the pre- and post-shoot scenes. At times when Davis's wrath and cutting remarks made the studio environment frigid. "She doesn't need a stage," Carson allegedly informed Ed McMahon afterwards. "She needs a courtroom. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." Several sources from The Tonight Show staff state that her method of treating other guests was her first transgression. Bette Davis wasn't merely a diva, as the events that followed would demonstrate. Her oratory skills were second to none. Not even Johnny Carson could keep it together. There was usually mayhem after an appearance by Bette Davis on shows featuring numerous celebrities. She would often turn her back on people on the couch and stop them mid-sentence, particularly younger performers or female visitors. Even when she wasn't on camera, Davis was a nightmare to handle because, as one former talent coordinator put it, you could practically see her fuming, already plotting how to take the spotlight back, whenever someone else had a huge laugh. Before stepping onto the stage, she would often ask for whiskey in her dressing room. Although it was par for the course for her generation, her inebriation frequently resulted in rude and hurtful comments. Several female Tonight Show employees from the 1970s said that Davis would sometimes use racial and sexist language that was shocking even at that time. A makeup artist recalled making an offer, but was cut off with a scathing comment. "Look for someone whose grip isn't so trembling as if they've been intoxicated for 3 days." During practice, Carson intervened when Davis started scolding a card operator for being too sluggish. Typically, Carson would avoid getting into direct confrontation with guests. According to a production assistant who was there, Johnny did step in and help out. "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect or we don't speak at all," he whispered. Davis froze, obviously unprepared for the challenge. Then he stepped back quietly. It wasn't merely Davis's demeanor that Carson found challenging. Her behavior was at odds with her intelligence. Carson had the utmost respect for her as one of Hollywood's most accomplished artists. After her last appearance in the early 1980s, he allegedly told his producer, "That's it. Life's too short to be verbally flogged by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she's got." If Bette Davis's sharp tongue was directed at adults who could defend themselves, Carson's next troublesome guest ventured into even more sinister realms. discretionary conduct toward female employees. This is Mickey Rooney, the roving young actor. Rooney was a member of Hollywood aristocracy and a living memorial to the studio's golden age. He was the world's top box office attraction from 1939 to 1941. The Tonight Show should have treated his appearances as heartfelt homages to an extraordinary career. Rather, they gained notoriety among the crew members for the wrong reasons. Very improper behavior, infrequent intoxication, and erratic energy. He feels he can be a pervert because of his diminutive stature. After a particularly bad performance in the middle of the 1970s, Carson allegedly informed his producer. Even the unflappable Johnny Carson was repulsed by Rooney's behavior, which had become notorious among female staff members by the time he was in his mid-50s. For his inappropriate groping, sexist comments, and complete lack of respect for professional boundaries. Many members of the crew attest that the younger production helpers would frequently request a transfer the moment they found out Mickey Rooney was going to make an appearance. When you handed him water, he'd suddenly ask if you were married, bring you slightly too close, and grab your hand. The incident occurred in the late 1970s, according to one ex-assistant. He would grip your wrist for an uncomfortable amount of time if you attempted to walk away. It was equally concerning that Rooney didn't seem to know when he'd had too much to drink. Staff members of The Tonight Show asserted that he exhibited clear signs of intoxication on no less than 3 instances, stuttering and losing his train of thought in the middle of his sentences. On one infamous appearance in 1977, he started telling a story about Judy Garland that suddenly became improper, prompting Carson to cut him off and change the subject. According to reports, during the following commercial break, Carson looked across at his producer and questioned, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" The generational gap and radically different expectations of conduct between them made Rooney very challenging for Carson. Rooney, who was born in 1920, belonged to a period in Hollywood where specific behaviors toward women were accepted, if not condoned. According to a veteran director, Johnny wasn't perfect, but he was rather forthright about his expectations of professionalism. Rooney seemed oblivious to the existence of those sentences. Carson made the unusual move of personally apologizing to Rooney following a particularly awkward tape in which Rooney made sexually provocative comments toward a young actress who was also a guest that night. "Never before had I witnessed Johnny so mortified by a guest's actions," he assured her. "That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again." The director firmly meant what he said. After that, Mickey Rooney's guest appearances grew less common. Rather than airing live at night, Carson allegedly demanded in the late 1970s and early 1980s that any segment featuring Rooney be taped during the day. Though Rooney's behavior may have been awkward, Carson faced a new challenge with his next unruly guest. They achieved legendary status among the hosts and producers of tonight's event thanks to an outrageously long list of requests. Zia Gabor, the unstable diva who almost ended Johnny Carson's life. Throughout Carson's tenure, Gabor made multiple appearances on The Tonight Show, captivating audiences with her stunning good looks, strong Hungarian accent, and flirty wit. She incorporated the jokes about her several marriages and extravagant lifestyle into her charisma, which made her captivating, stunning, outrageous, and humorous to audiences. On the other hand, employees revealed an entirely different narrative behind the scenes. Several people who worked on The Tonight Show have said that Gabor was one of the most unpleasant and demanding guests that the show has ever had. Carson allegedly made the quip, "I'd rather interview a cat," during a particularly draining appearance. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and custom lighting. Her list of requirements started long before she even set foot in the studio. In her dressing room, she had her temperature set precisely at 74 degrees, a vase of fresh orchids, never carnations, a bottle of Perrier water with 3 ice cubes, and her own lighting technician, who was flown in at the show's expense, according to former staff. She was also adamant that no female guests less than 40 years old be featured on the same show. The author's style was comical. A personnel coordinator from the past found it funny. "When we initially saw it, we assumed it was a prank." Gabor allegedly stayed in her dressing room and refused to leave if anything was missed. The team had to rush to satisfy her requests, which caused tapes to be delayed and visitors to be left waiting. Among the employees, one scandalous event became legendary. The cosmetics department was missing Gabber's favorite foundation brand when she got to the set for the taping. Her accusers claim she got into an angry confrontation with the chief makeup artist, during which she demanded that someone be dispatched to Beverly Hills right once to procure the appropriate product. According to an ex-producer, Johnny had to step in. He spoke to her on the phone and said, "Jonna, darling, you already look stunning, and we have a show to do. Let's save the makeup crisis for another day." Carson was genuinely irritated by more than simply her actions. The mayhem she wreaked on everyone else was the real problem. Because of the delays, other guests had to wait, production timetables were thrown off, and crew workers had to put in extra hours to compensate. Despite the irritation she caused, Gabber continued to receive invitations to return for more appearances. Reportedly, Carson turned to his executive producer and said, "Next time she wants to come on, tell her we've renamed it The Tonight Show starring Zora Gabber, and I'll happily play her sidekick." This happened after Gabber arrived 40 minutes late and complained about how she had been introduced, evidence that not even Johnny Carson could resist her charms when the cameras were rolling. If Gabber's diva demands were tiring, Carson's next problematic guest brought a different kind of discomfort, one that was more about personal limits than vanity. Johnny Carson was never quite prepared for Shelley Winters, the untamed hurricane. Winters, a two-time Oscar winner whose career included both glitzy parts as ingenue and more realistic portrayals of characters, would have been an ideal guest on The Tonight Show. Her knowledge of Hollywood history was extensive, and she spoke with authority. Those who worked behind the scenes, however, say that she was also among Carson's most unpredictable and disruptive guests. According to Carson, during one especially heated interview, Shelley exploded and stopped talking. Winters' incapacity, or reluctance, to adjust to the show's humorous tone became legendary among the Tonight Show staff. She frequently began her segments with passionate political speeches or shocking personal confessions, leaving Carson unable to keep the piece on topic, instead of entertaining tales or commercial talk. A 5-minute tirade about media hypocrisy and political corruption ensued from a straightforward inquiry regarding her most recent film at one appearance in the mid-1970s. According to a former director, Johnny had exceptional conversational control. However, navigating Shelley was akin to attempting to control a tornado. As soon as she began, your only option was to patiently wait for her to finish before the next ad. Her erratic behavior went well beyond what she said. Brutal, unexpected physical attacks were something Winters was known for. During an appearance on a British talk show, she famously tossed a glass of whiskey at actor Oliver Reed, who had made sexist comments in response. After that, word got around fast in the broadcast industry, and the Tonight Show crew was extra careful with her appearances. To prepare for her performance, we took down any fragile items from the set. A stage manager confessed, if it could be thrown, it disappeared. Carson's co-workers noted that Winters' impulsive behavior was driven by honesty rather than harshness or hubris. Despite the stress she created, regardless of the potential backlash, she never missed an opportunity to express her strong opinions on politics, beliefs, and justice. Carson acknowledged her sincerity, even though he seemed nervous during her more passionate moments. Johnny Carson allegedly told his producer, "I might not want to spend a weekend with her, but I'll give her this. She believes every word she says." Shelley Winters could have been frustrating for Carson, but she showed that even in the realm of staged entertainment, there were guests who wouldn't play by the rules. It is possible that Johnny Carson's tolerance was tested by Shelley Winters' raging unpredictableness. However, the subsequent unruly guest he had drove him to an uncomfortable place that beyond mere personality problems. It had nothing to do with vanity or instability this time. An ideological debate ensued. Carson's increasing concern revolved around a classic Hollywood beauty whose political beliefs and behind the scenes behavior of others deeply affected him. Jane Russell, the political bombshell that Johnny Carson found intolerable. In the 1940s and 1950s, Jane Russell was a defining sex symbol thanks to her seductive performances in films such as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The Outlaw. She was a natural fit for The Tonight Show due to her glitz humor and legendary stature in Hollywood. However, she was practically unheard of following a handful of appearances in the early 1970s on Carson's show. Those on the inside also claim it wasn't a coincidence. Carson was more and more uneasy with Russell's vocal political opinions, which he believed went beyond just opinion and intolerance. According to former Tonight Show staff, Carson made a point of keeping the show politically independent and welcoming, despite the fact that he was a lifelong Republican. Guests with varied viewpoints were welcome, according to Johnny. What one veteran producer found intolerable was when such views became bigoted or vicious. Russell, according to several employees, would frequently make derogatory remarks regarding the LGBTQ+ personnel. Rumor has it that she demanded someone else do her touch-ups during a tape in the early 1970s because she would not allow a lesbian makeup artist to do them. An episode involving Rock Hudson, the actor, was even more concerning, according to a talent coordinator. While his sexuality was not known to the general public at the time, it was common knowledge among Hollywood insiders. As a result, Russell allegedly made derogatory comments about him and refused to appear on the same program. Carson was truly hurt because he had a large LGBT community of friends and workers. In that regard, he was revolutionary. The coordinator made it clear that he would not stand for any form of bias in his studio. During a commercial break in 1973, supposedly, things reached a breaking point. Several members of the crew witnessed Russell making disparaging comments about the new civil rights law, which he promptly reported to Carson as part of an informal conversation. Her remarks ultimately determined her downfall, even though they were never recorded. After that, Jane Russell was discreetly and irrevocably cut from The Tonight Show cast. The move was significant for a host who seldom meddled with guest reservations, particularly with someone of Russell's prominence. It was a rare occasion when Johnny Carson took a strong stand on a personal issue, rather than for the sake of stardom or popularity, but of principle. Throughout his 30 years as host of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson had hosted guests from many walks of life. He had the deepest animosity for a particular guy whose public charisma clashed with his darker side, and that included both irascible legends and self-absorbed celebrities. The late Jerry Lewis. Lewis was a humanitarian and comedy talent to millions. The dynamic performer who, every year, earned millions of dollars for charity through his telethons, while simultaneously making generations of people laugh. But behind the scenes, some people who worked on The Tonight Show said that Lewis was among the most ostentatious and disrespectful celebrities who had ever made an appearance on the show. He's the result of ego getting in the way of talent, Carson allegedly told a coworker during a particularly awful experience. In a notorious taping, Lewis was known to dominate the conversation, interrupt Carson and the other guests on multiple occasions, and even reach over to tie Carson's tie without permission, which clearly angered the normally composed host. Even worse was his treatment of the employees. He yelled at a camera operator for very noisy breathing during a rehearsal and refused to learn anyone's name, instead calling them by their job titles. For Carson, the most repulsive part was seeing how privately Lewis treated those who were unable to advance his career, in contrast to his public persona as an advocate for children. A producer recalls that Johnny was deeply unsettled by that deceitful behavior. In the early 1980s, after Lewis made his last appearance on the show, Carson allegedly told him, "Never again." This effectively ended his run on the show. Carson was unusually forthright in summarizing his sentiments years later. Even though there are a lot of fakes in this town, he manages to stand out by being really hostile. A glimpse behind the glittering facade of Hollywood's golden period is revealed by Carson's secret blacklist, which included performers such as Frank Sinatra, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zagabber, Shelley Winters, Jerry Lewis, and Frank Sinatra. Over the course of 30 years, Carson's studio saw every big star, providing him with a rare opportunity to discern between the real deal and those who were just acting. Neither resentment nor slander drove him. Cruelty, particularly toward weaker people, was something he just couldn't stand. According to an experienced director, Johnny had a straightforward exam. How were the pages, assistants, and cameramen treated by them? He learned everything from that. As allegations of hotness abuse and misbehavior involving several of these celebrities surfaced in the years following Carson's passing, numerous of his private judgments were validated. The implicit blacklist he maintained serves as a reminder that the golden age of Hollywood was not only about the stars. Although some were profoundly flawed, others were encouraging. The camera doesn't just add tenleby, it adds a layer of fiction. Carson's greatest contribution wasn't merely entertaining America nightly, but rather, looking below the surface illusion to see the reality.